Hello, thanks so much for joining us at Show Studio. Today, my panel and I will be discussing Gucci post Alessandro Michele. And to start off, we'll just do some brief introductions. My name's Emily Zak. I'll be chairing the panel.
My name is Ayo Ojo. I'm a fashion student at Central St. Martin's and also the founder of the Fashion Archive.
My name's Mandi Lennard and I'm the founder of creative agency Mandi's Basement.
I'm Andrew Davis. I'm a stylist based in London.
I'm Jeanie Annan-Lewin and I'm creative director of Perfect magazine.
All right, so let's get started. I think it's sort of a sweet irony that we've kind of come full circle. Alessandro Michele started his career at Gucci actually 20 years ago, loosely, but started his career as the creative director sort of with this 2015 menswear collection. So we sort of come full circle. And before we kind of get into the current collection, I think it might be interesting to just kind of zoom out a little bit and think about the influence that he's had, not only in, I'd say, Gucci's archive and Gucci's brand, but sort of, I think, the measure of a really impactful designer is when it reaches outside of the fashion industry, which I think that Alessandro Michele has. And I guess it would be interesting to just think about some of the influences that he's had over his 7-year tenure. And I mean, the first things that come to mind are, would we have this kind of newly found obsession with, more mass obsession with vintage, gender bending? I'm thinking Harry Styles, Jerry Leto. I'm thinking of some of the kind of more impactful collections we've seen. Let's talk about it. What do you think? Do you think Gucci will kind of return to something like Alessandro Michele in this new era, or do you think it will kind of move in a different direction?
I personally think it won't return to Alessandro's aesthetic because they actually want to go in a more commercial direction. So I heard under the grapevine, sort of through the grapevine actually, that one of the reasons why Alessandro left was because they wanted to go in a more commercial direction, and he didn't really want to go that way. And it's kind of strange because I looked at the financial report, and Q3 last year they made 2.6 billion euros, and that's more than they made in Q3 in 2021, which was 2.1 billion euros. So it's like you're making money, you're earning financially, and you still want to go more commercial. And it really shows that fashion is going in this like super commercial growth over, aesthetic and actually a brand with meaning. And so unfortunately, I think they're going away from Alessandro's aesthetic and they're going more commercial.
But some of that maybe is understandable because brands do want to change things up sometimes. What do you think, Mandy? Do you think we're going in a different...
I think it's very long overdue. I mean, I got fatigued with this very early on. I wasn't the biggest fan. I found it just logo heavy and just flogging the same aesthetic season after season. It just didn't really appeal to me. And I'm actually really excited about all the musical chairs that's going on now. I mean, obviously they're touting J.W. Anderson, Grace Wells Bonner, but Grace Wells Bonner, the chatter seems to be more Louis Vuitton. But I'm actually really excited about the change, and it will be completely different, for sure.
What do you think, Andrew?
I really liked the new show. I think, as Mandy said, we're ready for like a breath of fresh air. It was like, how many more times can we see like Memphis, witchy, goth princess teen, and all those loaded references. And I think this is a really nice modern palette cleanser, a really fresh way to show like some Gucci bangers, some really good classics. I think definitely, we were ready for something new.
What do you think?
I'm still undecided, actually. I mean, I get the sort of the strategic move and the paring down and sort of the moving away from sort of maximalism, but it feels, there's something about it that feels a bit sad, that feels a bit, I don't know, we're sort of losing a bit of a story, but perhaps in time the aesthetic will sort of still be the same, but maybe just slightly pared down, so maybe it's just tweaks and not, something a bit more harmonious in the middle.
Well, I think it's interesting that you see his shoes still on the runway.
I thought that was really nice.
He started off as an accessories designer.
Yeah.
And I always had the feeling that the clothes were secondary. They were kind of just accessories to the accessories.
100%.
Or that they were themed by the accessories, that it was like the scarf and the bag and the shoes and the glasses were more important. And to your point, huge drivers in commercial
Yeah.
success, right? So I think it's interesting to think about those points, like how will that be integrated or not? You know, if we get like a more minimalist designer to come in and rethink that, will the clothes become the focal point? What will be? I think also the rise of vintage and this kind of obsession with Tom Ford era Gucci, has that affected their thinking? Do they want to go back to something like that?
And also, I think whenever something goes to like minimalism and we talk about menswear, it always kind of, it then sort of all blemishes, sort of like blends into three brands. So suddenly like Gucci looks a little bit like Celine and Celine looks a little bit like Saint Laurent. And then that's when I'm a bit like, well, then what are we, you know, I don't need to see 14 different brand
Right.
tops. It sort of bores me. So I think we need to, yeah, that's probably what it was.
This show reminds me of, you know, at the end of the season when everyone's got designer fatigue.
Yeah.
And all the people in the industry and backstage, they actually start wearing all their shit clothes.
Yeah.
And almost like when they get back to London or on the last day of Fashion Week, they start wearing all their like high street stuff and they don't actually care how they look because they've had enough. And I just think that there was a real fame, musical, come, go-see vibe to it, especially with those leg warmers in the boots type thing. I kind of like that because it was almost like, you know, it's like we don't care, we want to be relaxed, we want to be cool, and I love restraint, and I found this show so refreshing after everything else. It was like, oh my God, here we go. And I thought the bags were amazing, the big oversized bags. And it's a bit like at Bottega when everyone went nuts about Kate Moss in the check shirt and the jeans.
Yeah.
I still can't believe that both of those were very, very fine, thin leather. It's almost like that kind of low-keyness. I think restraint is more impactful now. We need that era, or at least the palette cleanser of it.
I think there's a wind of change. I think Daniel Lee's Burberry is going to be simple, beautiful, crafted, very like his Bottega, and I think that's what we need in menswear at the moment. I'm ready for that shift. I'm ready to go back to something that's a little bit more wearable, easier on the eye. I don't think that people need to be spending and doing these crazy shows. It's 2023, you know, we're all living in really difficult times, and I like that restraint and that respect for what's going on in the world. I think it's really important. And I think that a lot of the houses will follow this. I think it'll be quite a similar theme where you'll see what you're getting.
Yeah, it does feel like, you know, the collections that they were very personal to his aesthetic, right, and to his vision to such a degree. I was trying to remember, you know, you really have to go quite far back to think of designers that made it so personal. I think it's quite an old-fashioned thing to be that personal, and I think that you're right. I think there's an element of it feeling. This collection that we saw feels, it's not that it feels generic, but it definitely doesn't feel that it's a reflection of a single person's vision in the way that it has up until now. And that is kind of interesting. It gives the people wearing it a chance to maybe, you know, in the notes, which I found quite hard to read, it does talk about styling. The focus is about styling, right? It's about how you wear it and less about somehow this prescription of this is how you should wear it, which is interesting.
I find that, sorry, I was going to say, I find that really interesting because the whole aspect of Gucci since Alessandro went there has been about styling. Like I remember watching the first show and then watching style.com after, and people were saying, this looks like the vintage clothing that you can buy in like the corner shop in London, in Brick Lane. And it's quite funny because I have a lot of friends who watch Gucci runway shows and then go thrifting and then replicate the looks that they see on the runway. So I've always felt like throughout Alessandro's time, it's always been about styling and how things are put together.
But also that was the beauty of it. It was like, you know, you can replicate and duplicate that look yourself on a budget and not have to pay those kind of prices.
Yeah, that became a whole TikTok kind of group.
Also, it just felt a bit more, sorry to interject, it just felt a bit more individual. What I sort of find and struggle with the new collection is that it feels really uniformy. And I think in a time when people's voices need to be heard and expression feels really important, is this the way that we should be going? But maybe it's just, you know, it's early days and perhaps it will move into something that I find a bit more comfortable with.
But I think the design team are an incredible team of kids, you know, from all over the world. And I'm sure this isn't the ideal thing that they wanted to send out, but
It's a placeholder.
They're being
Do
told
you think
what to
maybe
do.
instead of this very beautifully worded poetry in the press release, they should have just said we were doing the best we could under the circumstances? Might have been more. We were improvising, we were winging it. But you're right. I think that this is Italian craftsmanship. You know, don't be confused. There's still beautiful work. I liked your example actually with, you know, sometimes it's simplicities fools you because there's actually a lot of complexity there.
Yeah.
The design team is probably, you know, all the cool graduates anyway, you know, so they're going to be hooked into the right kind of references. But I think I love this whole freestyle thing. I think that fashion is so prescriptive and it's almost like you want such and such a piece, but I love the idea that how you wear it, so you can buy something as someone else can wear it differently. I find that so refreshing. It's almost like treating the customer as a civilian rather than someone who's going to be putting on a uniform and masquerading as the customer.
Although when we see it in magazines, it's going to be like that. So it's going to look like a uniform.
Well, you know, it's a really good point because
That's my point.
Right.
But
Because you know, the question is like, who is this for? Who is this collection for? Who's the customer that they have in mind? Is it the traditional customer? Is the customer that bought Alessandro Michele ready to move on to this? Is this
I
like
think
the
it's
graduate?
an older customer. I think they've got that customer. They think that customer's buying bags and shoes and belts and accessories, and they've lost that core older customer. Because I can look at this now, you know, and I can see coats that I'd like to buy. I've not seen a Gucci coat that I've wanted to buy.
Beautiful.
Incredible, beautiful coats. You know, the jeans were great. I've not been able to do that for a long time. And also, I think there was a shift in like some of the celebrities were older. You know, Idris Elba and his wife, Nick and Susie Cave. You know, like people that I feel like more of my generation in a way. So I think it's a definite shift looking at an older customer, definitely.
That got me really worried actually, because when I saw the mature couples on the front row, I thought, oh my God, here we go. Peter Lindbergh, 1996, with Demi Moore and Bruce Willis. And then we saw Perry Hines White from Wednesday. Marco Bizzarri was almost clinging onto him, which I found, again, you know, it's like, that's an insecurity thing. You know, maybe that's who's going to be in the campaign.
I know, I think Jeanie from Wednesday will definitely be at the women's show. She was wearing Gucci at the Golden Globes. So I
supposed
think,
to be a couple as well.
I think that's sewn up already. And that's the girl at the moment that everyone seems to want. I think that's the one they've all been fighting over.
Interesting.
Is anyone cooler than Nick Cave and Susie Big?
I know.
However old they are.
No.
Watching the live stream and seeing the pair of them and then seeing
just
Idris, I was
amazing.
like, I'm in. I love this.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant.
I mean, it's interesting. I think the brands, in the wake of in those early years, so let's go back, let's really rewind a little bit and go to that maybe first season, second season of Gucci. And it did feel like a change. Whether it was your personal aesthetic or not, I think it felt different, it felt new at the time.
Oh yeah, he had 3 days to put that together. It was 3 days and they'd got nothing ready. And there was a women's pre-collection that they were working on, and that's what that was, a women's pre-collection put on boys.
That's amazing.
yeah.
I mean, did that first collection, let's say, maybe not the men's, or if you registered the men's collection, great. What did that first September show, did that mean anything to you, or did it feel more like...
This one that was in January, people were silent. There were 5 of us that jumped up, myself, Katie, Anders Christian Madsen, Ben Reardon, Luke Day, a few of us jumped up, but a lot of people were just like, what was that? And we were in already. We were like, this is genius. We wanted this.
Katie was familiar with him anyway.
And Katie had worked with him. She was the only person that was let backstage. So she ran backstage, she chatted to him. And I think she said something like, look number 1 was amazing. We got to Paris and I picked Katie up to go to a show. And she was standing there and I was like, God, what she did? And he'd made her look number 1. And he'd sent it to her so that she could wear it on the first day of Paris. And I thought that was really great, that way that was the way that he worked. He would communicate with the press himself, you know, as well as his teams doing things. He was a very personable person. And I think that was a really important thing about his kind of time there.
He made it more accessible in some ways. Yeah.
But that, I mean, I was like, oh my God, you've got look number 1 on. That's amazing.
Of course. And then I think a lot of brands tried to replicate that kind of, that turnaround, right? It felt like actually almost sometimes just a bit like, oh God, here we go again.
It was that shift that we felt when Hedi started doing Saint Laurent and then Dior. It was that kind of a shift in menswear.
Agreed.
It was really important. And then the women's kind of continued, and then it snowballed from there. It just became more and more loaded.
I mean, I think most designers, just the frequency of collections that they have to produce, there often is this bleed. I always feel like menswear collections, they can be like a testing ground sometimes in a very particular way, or they can be the inspiration, depending on how you look at it. How do you sort of see, let's do some predictions now. Let's go in the future. Where do we think this next September women's wear collection will be? I mean, obviously there has to be some speculation of who do we think is going to be there? Do we think it's just going to be the studio team again? Do we think they're going to place someone by then? Anyone want to make a guess at who that might be?
I think it's quite interesting because I do like this collection in terms of going in a different direction for Gucci, but at the same time, I don't really think this collection has a lot of an identity. So a lot of these clothes, I can see other designers doing them. So like the exaggerated shoulders, they look like Balenciaga. There's a look with like silver trousers, those skinny, it just reminds me of Adi Slimane. So when it comes to the women's wear, I have no idea what they're going to do because this is almost like a sort of transition collection in a way.
Also, there's not many people out of contract and available that could just jump into the job. There's a few great young designers maybe that should be at Gucci that do their own collection and not.
Let's make some suggestions if they're listening. Hello, Gucci.
Mandi, who do you think?
Well, the chatter is Jonathan Anderson, but he's already got Loewe unless his contract's up soon. And then Grace Wells Bonner and Lou Leach was saying that the whole buzz at this show was people gossiping about who's going to take over,
Yeah.
But this whole thing about relationships and having a creative director at a maison, it goes back to the way that the Chinese, employ people just for regular jobs. They don't want to meet them at a cocktail party, they want to watch them at a cocktail party, or they want to build a relationship with them, which, you don't just want to get to know somebody over a weekend in a sunny weekend at their palazzo or something. You can't get to know somebody, you've got to build a relationship. And also, we don't know whether Marco's going to be there much longer either. So there's lots of...
There was just an announcement that said he's staying.
Pino announced that he was staying the other day.
But
you never know.
Right thing to say, isn't it? And also, when you're having a change and a new person comes in, it's actually very healthy and positive to change that infrastructure.
Yeah.
You don't want... I'm just imagining someone like Grace Wells Bonner, who I don't think would be going to this, but you were talking about identity and personal. The designers that I really love and cherish at the moment are Bianca Saunders, Samuel Ross, Martine Rose, and they are absolutely dressing a personal vision, and it's just loaded with authenticity. And Martine Rose, how many days ago was that show at Pitti? Amazing. She's just still really streaming on every Instagram, TikTok. It's just been incredible, and I know that she's got investment from Tomorrow, but that is what I call an independent label, and I just look at the brand values and what she's got going on into every orifice of that business. I can say exactly the same for Grace Wells Bonner. It's just a very tight, it's so authentic, whereas I never really found Gucci like that under Alessandro.
What's so interesting though is what you said is kind of my issue with this Gucci collection, because like a lot of the silhouettes, they look like Martine Rose to me, but when I look at Martine Rose, okay, I know it's inspired by London in the 80s and the tailoring, and I also know she's inspired by rave culture and she mixes all of that. But when I look at this, it's the same silhouette but without the same ideas behind it, so then it becomes less strong, and it's like if I have to choose between buying a Gucci coat or a Martine Rose coat that looks similar, I always choose the Martine Rose one because I know where the influence is coming from and it's richer in terms of the references. So that's why it becomes a bit confusing, like who is this collection for? Because I see so many designers that do the same thing that I'm seeing in this collection, but just better.
But I think that core customer that buys a bamboo bag at an airport, they don't care who the creative director is, they don't care who does hair and makeup, who the stylist is, if it was at the Gucci hub or if it was on Mars. They don't care. They're into that label already. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a very insular world that we live in, that we care about people and their references and all of that. But I think,
But that customer could be alienated by this collection.
I think it's so normal that maybe it couldn't offend anybody.
I think one of the things, again, coming back to, I'm not saying that the Alessandro Michele's collections necessarily spoke to me personally, but all in grey. But I would say, though, that I think there was always a cleverness in terms of, you'd have this crazy ensemble, but there was almost an understanding that a customer would buy one piece of that.
Yeah.
Very few customers, and there were probably some, would buy everything. So it was like, again, the clothes were a backdrop for the bag, for the glass. So it was more about, he studied as a costume designer, right? So there's a theatrical stage setting quality. Obviously you've got, the show where you have little, the models held their versions of their heads under their arms. I mean, come on, this is insanity, right? It's something out of...
It's art.
It's art, it is. I mean, in a way it is. I mean, I just think it almost feels more like theater, like theater.
Incredible, made to be memorable, to sell belts.
To sell bags, to sell shoes, and he did, right?
Resonate on the gram.
Yeah, yes. And we can't underestimate that. I think...
And that came at the right time for all that as well.
Definitely.
I mean, the revenue was just insane. And actually, the biggest markets has been US and China, bigger than they ever had before. And I think that's been the danger of the popularity of it, because Kering as a holding company, it was relying too much on Gucci profits. And that's always a dangerous thing. To kind of have so the shareholders were just putting so much pressure on it. It had to burst at some point soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, I'm impressed that you looked at the revenue. I had that feeling, though, anyway, without knowing it, that it seemed like, why break up what was effectively a really successful commercial enterprise? And I'm not sure it was, I don't know, we can only speculate, because it feels kind of like a breakup, right? It feels like a breakup. I wonder if it has more to do with what you guys were saying. It's just like, there's just only so far it's so much about the relationship. It's so personal. There's just only so far. And I imagine it got tricky to
Also, he's probably exhausted.
something new. Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah, so is Harry Styles and Jared Leto.
Bow out now instead of having a breakdown and doing something that you regret. Do you know what I mean?
Right. And you said, Andrew, we've all gone through difficult times, and it's been a hard couple, 2-3 years. And I wonder if now we want more from our clothes, if we want to be comforted, if we want there's sort of the experience of our clothes to feel also more of an internal experience, more as much as an external one. I don't know what your thoughts are about that. I feel like it would make sense.
In fact, first of all, I think the Adidas collaboration was incredible. Yeah. I thought that was something that just really worked. My first reaction was, oh my God, this works. And it was a really interesting, original take on the whole thing. So I really salute him for that.
Yeah, I love the hacker one as well. I thought that was really, really clever. Smart. I was like, wow, you take those two people, put them in a room, and that's what you get. That's brilliant. And they've become collector's pieces, and they were great pieces to shoot. You could hardly get them, but they were great pieces to shoot when you did get them. Also, I think the casting was a really important thing. The casting shift, we were looking at these traditional, beautiful models, and he kind of shifted it to, this sensibility where people aren't perfect, and there's something a bit strange. And that geek, that outsider, I loved that he brought that to the forefront.
He launched a lot of new era models, for sure.
Let's think of Ellie Goldstein, the model that he used with Down syndrome. I mean, even the whole aesthetic around having someone smiling with like gaps in their teeth, and I think you're right. I think that the aesthetic of imperfection, I'm not, it's sort of say, did he start that? But I think he certainly put it on a grand stage. He used the brand's popularity, which at that point was definitely at its height, to sort of champion a different aesthetic, something that felt definitely more inclusive. But there were also some points of controversy. I remember actually watching the
collection where the models were in straitjackets and thinking, I don't think everything is okay at Gucci right now. I don't think that man is in a happy place.
I didn't quite get that one.
And, there was a model that protested, just even making mental health something sort of gimmicky for a fashion show.
Yeah.
I remember at the time, it felt, I was like, oh, did he plan that? And then it wasn't until afterwards I was like, no. She was letting it be known that she felt that was a step too far. And I kind of understand that too. Yeah, but I do think that was the point where I thought, is everything okay? How is it going over there? Like, what's the vibe? What's going on? Yeah.
I'm really curious to see who would go there.
That's all we're bothered about.
I don't think anyone is going to. I think they're going to keep the design team for quite a while, and I think they're going to have guest people in there instead.
Which will develop. I mean, give them breathing space.
But if you work out that a creative director is around 10 million a year, so half a year they save 5 million. They go another season, they saved another 5 million.
What happened with Calvin Klein and Raf, right?
It's a lot of money, yeah. I mean, Calvin Klein was a sorry state.
And also, I think when something is so, not one note, but when something is so sort of like stuck in our minds, like we're so familiar with that aesthetic, it's going to take a really long time for that to shift. Like right now, I look at Gucci and I go, it doesn't really make any sense, and I'm not sure if I like it, but I'm sure I'll marinate over it and then come round like everybody else. But I think the customer and everybody else needs a bit of time.
Yeah.
And that design team needs a bit of time as well to kind of find their own feet.
Yeah.
I think we're probably being a bit overcritical of this particular collection. It is a placeholder collection.
Yeah, like a palette cleanse.
And for a palette cleanser, it's refreshing after all the kind of, hyper-saturated, that same look season after season and all the logos. It was just, this restraint.
Also, I'm really excited to see what he does next.
Yeah.
Is he going to be an artist like Helmut Lang did and totally drop out of...
Bag. I read in one of the reviews that they said it was crocodile or something, and I thought that Gucci, Kering is fur-free.
Oh.
Yeah, right? I don't know. Maybe it's simulated crocodile, I don't know.
Well, that's a question, Karen.
Yeah.
So do you think, though, coming back to what you're saying, so you think that the next collection could also be studio designed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do. I think they're very competent.
That's that amazing
team.
jacket, isn't it?
I think throwing someone in the deep end like this it would be a huge mistake and lots of pressure on any designer that they pick that's out there at the moment. I think everybody needs to find their feet and recalibrate, and perhaps this is the start of that.
Also, they might promote from within. There's a head of design that worked there all the time with him, and they might give him the job.
I think when Tomorrow first invested in 2001 in Martine Rose, they were very much, when they announced it, it was very much all about allowing Martine to do what she needed to do and not put the pressure on her about developing and making commercial, but actually allowing her authenticity to just breathe and give her the infrastructure to grow as a designer. And that's why I get really excited about people like someone like Grace Wells Bonner, Imagine, because she hasn't really been at a maison before, and what you get when you shift from your own label to being somewhere where you've got a shred of fabric that you want it in a certain way, and it goes back and comes back all embellished how you precisely want. That luxury, she hasn't even had that yet. So someone like that, it could be an amazing shift, of gears for her.
Yeah, amazing opportunity.
And almost like, look what she's done so far. Imagine what she can do when she's got that infrastructure around her.
I think you're right. I mean, there's the finishing and all that kind of the Italian.
She would never compromise. She would never do like a 120 look collection just because she had to tick that box.
No.
And her temperament as a person, she kind of commands quite a lot of respect. She's quite intense. I mean, she's very funny and cute, but she is quite intense, and I can't imagine her. This generation of designers like her, Bianca and Samuel going anywhere where they're expected to be battery hens.
Really? I was just going to say that because, like with Martine Rose, for example, she skips shows. So she feels like she doesn't have something to say. She just won't do a show. And that's so refreshing to see someone that's not just forcing things just because it's Fashion Week or just because you have to make a certain amount of collections in a year. And I found that really refreshing. And I think that was a difficult part of Alessandro's collections because it seemed as though he was doing so many things, so many collaborations, that sometimes designers don't have time to develop their aesthetic, which is why the collection started to look a bit similar and his signatures became a bit too stagnant.
And then you get into Galliano territory where they almost like need to lose it just to kind of reset their life.
I mean, do brands even need creative directors?
I think they need ideas people, definitely, because the businessmen are suits with no style. It's just about money, you know? So you need someone with a vision that's well-traveled, cultured, to kind of, you know, say, let's show in Rome, let's show in France, you know, let's show here, you know, let's do this, let's build this, let's get that musician. I don't think the CEO would have known who that band was before the design team had gone, there's this really cool band.
You probably didn't know who they were.
And then at the...
But yeah, I think you need a figurehead. And also, you know, with most, you know, wherever I've worked in my trajectory, you always want to be inspired by people around you. You kind of need subliminal mentors the whole time. You can't just stay stagnant. So you need a figurehead to kind of G up the team. And then that figurehead, who's like the god of the house, you know, they then become inspired by the team. And then you get the real synergy.
I think it helps with the myth of fashion because a lot of times, like, we praise creative directors as like this godly figure, like you said, but there'll be a footwear designer that's designed the footwear and someone who's in charge of the menswear who's specifically designed a lot of the menswear looks. And so I think it's easier for people in fashion to just like attribute all this stuff to one person
It takes
rather than, this person did this, but I think that's less sexy, which is why it's good to have a creative director. I just think it helps with the story of fashion.
That's what I love about Kim Jones. You know, he always, you know, is always like promoting the team, and you know,
you can see those kids.
He even looks after them. Like, you know, I remember going to a talk in London a couple of years ago, and he was saying how, you know, even what they were being paid, if he didn't think they were being paid enough, he would negotiate that they got more money. You know, he really looks after his team, and I think, you know, he's just a shining example of really great machinery. I mean, the team can still challenge him.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. I mean, wrapping our discussion kind of down a little bit, do you think that just looking at the influence that Alessandro Michele's had, sounds like we agree that it's time to make a change for the brand. And I think we can see the influence he's had in the fashion industry, outside of the fashion industry. Do we think that's going to continue on past his time at Gucci? I mean, some of that maybe depends on what he does next, to your point, Andrew, but do we feel like that's going to continue, this kind of gender-bending, vintage mixing kind of, do we feel like that's done with him, or will it continue on with it without him, for example?
I think a watered-down version is going to continue. I think people who kind of work and are in fashion and people who are fans of fashion will, you know, continue to fly those flags. But I think at the end of the day, money is the primary concern, and people want to make as much money as possible, so they want to make it as digestible as possible, don't they? So I think that's the direction it'll go.
Yeah, those airport shops, like Andrew mentioned earlier, I remember being at Gatwick, and they had one of those shops, and it was literally like a kiosk. It was a whole shop, and it was just phone covers.
Yep.
And those awful trainers with the
that's what people can afford, isn't it? You want to buy into that lifestyle, but really you can't, because who's buying one of those coats? You're like, you know, we'd all love a sequined blazer, but that's going to set you back like $7,000. so you get a piece of it, don't you? You get the sunglasses, you get like the phone case, you get the weird ugly shoe. So you can kind of be part of that gang in the least way possible.
When the marginal utility falls, you know, is saturated, that's when, you know, it just backfires on you. And I think that's what they've done. They've kind of gone down to the level, to the kind of lowest demographic, when they should keep, you know, I just think they tried to make too much money. And
that was the issue with Tom Ford, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When he came in and he tried to really pare back like all the just Gucci being everywhere and it being oversaturated. And it's always going to be a problem. Like there's like a fine point where if you pass that and your brand becomes oversaturated, very quickly people don't care. And you have to play this game where you're sort of constantly staying in the middle of that. And I think right now, yeah, they are getting a bit oversaturated. And I am a big fan of Alessandro's work. I just think that at Gucci itself, it was starting to stagnate. But I am quite curious to see where he goes or what he does.
Oh, I'd love to see Alessandro Chanel. I think that would be a really nice pairing. I think it'd be really,
I had
really,
goosebumps just then. That was
really,
exciting.
really interesting. And I think in a way, he's preparing himself for a job like that. And I think he might, he's out of contract now.
Yeah.
I think there are a few designers that are after that job.
I think he might go into interiors. I feel like that's...
Or even interiors would be amazing. Or art. I think he'd be an amazing artist. I think his ideas and the way he presents things are incredible.
And lastly, what are our predictions? I know we talked about this a little bit, but if let's just assume Gucci's listening, who would we like to see at the helm in September if they choose to put someone at the helm in September? Just as your wish list, who would you like to see there?
I'd like to see Martine.
Yeah, I'd like to see Martine. I'd vote for Martine as well.
I think she'd be amazing.
What about you guys? What about you?
I find it fascinating that the same designers are being speculated for Gucci and Louis Vuitton. So like J.W. Anderson, Grace Wells Bonner, Martine Rowe. I just find it really interesting because they're completely different brands, but yet I guess those are the people that are available / we just think can move, versus a lot of designers seem to be sort of tied down to what they're doing, which is why there's, and also I've heard Sharaf from Casablanca also be put into that list of names. So yeah, it's just really interesting.
What you were saying about, Alessandro Michele and gender neutral and all this kind of thing, he might have opened some doors in that respect, but it's very much the new wave and the new generation. I mean, all the designers I know are very much projecting that, and this is the kind of norm for this generation. This is how the trends are changing. One other thing that struck me about this show, actually, with kind of how the designers we really respect are presenting themselves, is it wasn't really the most diverse show at all. I thought there were very few Black and South Asian designers. That kind of stuck out for me a little bit.
That's a very good point, actually. I think diversity is something that, it's like, I feel sometimes that diversity of body shape, diversity of any kind, it sort of feels like it kind of dips, it's an optional sometimes, which is, I thought we learned those lessons already, but it feels like maybe we haven't yet. Any thoughts on that? If Gucci's listening?
I don't know.
It's just how that one happened to be, wasn't it?
I mean, it's just, I get so bored of talking about it because I say the same thing everywhere I go all the time, and nothing seems to have changed. That was quite dramatic.
That was like a mic throwdown. Boom.
I'd love to see more of different conversations, but in order to have different conversations, you need different people. So perhaps the merry-go-round of designers that we have need to be opened up a bit, like everything else.
That's actually probably almost a good point
This
to
is
end on.
magnified, of course, by the incredible casting at Martine Rose. All roads lead back to Martine.
It's true.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's probably, anyone have any last thoughts? Anything you'd like to finish on? I think that we'll wrap up from there. Think Gucci, think Martine, think...
It was very cool that Jeremy O. Harris was in the audience at Gucci, wearing the hacker bag and the dungarees from the twin collection.
Yeah, that is brilliant, actually.
I like that about the show.
Well, I have a feeling people are still going to buy Gucci bags at the airport lounge, no matter who's in charge.
Exactly. They're fine.
And I
all
think
good.
This was a shop of phone cases and those waspy trainers.
Well, I would say, though, in defense of that very thing, that one of the reasons why he was so powerful as a cultural force was that he went all the way across. People who couldn't buy into anything else could buy a phone case. And that's probably why he had as much influence culturally as he did, is he wasn't just staying within a fashion bubble. And I think that has some merit. I think it has value. So I'll be interested to see what he does with that, if he takes that where he goes next.
I think what interests me the most actually about this is Alessandro Michele has been there for so long, like since 2002. So he's been there with Tom Ford, he's been there with Frida, and then he was inside the design team when he got hired as the creative director. And they're not really going to replicate someone now who understands the brand to that level. So it'll be really interesting, whoever comes, how that's going to change things.
With all the musical chairs, though, it's almost like Ferragamo is so exciting because of Max and Matthew Blasey at Bottega. So it's like all these musical chairs. It kind of gives us all the jolt to keep our own interest in these brands. I just think it's a really exciting time for change.
Yeah, agreed. Andrew, any last thoughts?
I'd just like to applaud the design team. I think they did something really special. I think they did a really great job. I mean, what a tough gig to do after such a successful person, and I think they did something quite great.
What about you? Do you have any last?
No, not really. I'm just let's looking forward to seeing what's next.
All right, we want the big bag. That's our last thought as a group.
Bag.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And
And a round of applause for Alessandro Michele as well.
yay.